There's a hard balance in there, though. I think there's a difference between challenging and dying to a one shot. I don't think those things are the same.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
His name's Trip. That's what people call me, at least have for a long time. I've been playing this game. Oh gosh, I'm 25 years old now. I want to say I started when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Early Burning Crusade, whenever that was. I remember my dad came home from the store one day when I was a young little kid with this game. Brought it home because you still had to buy physical copies in the store, and downloaded it. And I watched him play for a little bit, and I was like, "This is pretty cool." And so I made a character on his account. Didn't really know what I was doing back then, obviously. Kind of just, was messing around. I think the highest level I got in Burning Crusade was maybe level 35 or something like that. I made a hunter. That was the first ever character I ever made. And his name was Trips. And that's where that name kind of came from. As the years went on, I kind of got better and better at the game. But that's where it all kind of started, was just my dad randomly bringing home this game that he wanted to try out, because my dad always kind of had a thing for online games. And that's kind of what sprung it for me. I'd always liked video games at the time, but this was the first one that I ever really kind of got into and would wake up and play every day. So yeah, I think 08 was like Burning Crusade, I want to say, because I remember being super impressed when my dad got the Netherwing Drakes. Well, let's see. Early memories have got to be the friendships that I've made in this game. You meet tons of people playing video games online. Some of them you talk to once and then you never talk to again. Some of them I'm still friends with to this day. Some of these people were because when you're playing video games online, it doesn't really matter how old you are. Most people don't even know. One guy that I'm still friends with to this day is in his 40s now. He was friends with me, back when he was in his early 20s and I was 8, 9 years old. And I think some of my favorite and fondest memories are some of the friendships that began right here in this game. And that's a pretty cool thing. Because had it not been for this game, some of these friendships wouldn't have even formed. Earlier memories, maybe less on the serious side. Some ridiculous mistakes that everybody makes. I used to think every mage was an enchanter. I remember early Wrath of the Lich King when I finally hit level 80, and I was still bad at the game. I was still terrible at this point. I still hadn't gotten any better from my Burning Crusade days. I thought every mage that I came across, I thought was an enchanter, and so instead of using trade chat to find an enchanter, I would message every mage that I saw in Stormwind or Orgrimmar or whatever I was playing at the time. I was like, "You enchanter?" And 9 times out of 10 they'd say yes, but that's just because professions were a little different back then. But I was like, okay, well, it makes sense for me. But every now and then you get one to be like, no, and it confused me. I never really quite understood it. It took me quite a while to understand it. And as far as early memories go, I wasn't good at the game, and because I was a kid, I think by the time Wrath of the Lich King came out, I was maybe 10 years old. Still didn't really quite have a grasp on the game. My dad was consistently clearing every raid, every tier. I remember him dragging me along whenever he went to one, telling his guild, he's like, "Hey, this is my son. He's going to come raid with us." And I was dead for, I think, every single fight. I don't think I ever made it through a single fight, maybe one or two where they were just kind of being nice to me and I maybe did, better one time or another. But it's nice to look back on those memories and think, how far you've come in terms of one specific game, because, no game has held my attention for this long. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. I got scammed quite a few times back then as well. I remember people telling me like, "Oh, you give me gold on this character and I'm going to bring my other character over here and give you this much," and just falling for all kinds of dumb stuff, typical scammer things. And, you learn lessons from those. But looking back on, it's kind of funny. It's like, oh boy, like, man, I was really that stupid. The nice part is, though, is all those memories, they're fond. None of them, I don't really look back on any of them and think, well, that was kind of crappy, and be upset and mad that it happened. Obviously, maybe in the time when, you're losing gold or you make a silly mistake and delete a character because your armor was broken or something stupid like that. I personally never did that. I always knew about repairing. Thankfully, I was good at some things. But, looking back on them, I don't have any animosity towards them. It's all happy, fond memories. And I think that's a pretty cool thing that a video game can create for you. Of all things, people view video games in different lights, and I look at mine and I'm like, wow, like, these are some of the fondest memories that I have. And as weird as that may sound to some people, there's a lot of people out there that'll agree. And I think that's pretty cool. Nowadays, I'm very, very big into PvE. I haven't touched PvP in a long time. It's been It's been quite a while. Take it back to like maybe Mists of Pandaria, and that was a little bit of everything. I ended up getting 2300 in like rated battlegrounds. I was cutting edge at one point for Siege of Orgrimmar. I did a little bit of it all back then, and as I kind of went further into the game and started kind of understanding the more nuanced sides of things and whatnot, kind of strayed away from PvP. I started to get less and less interested in it. I started to get a little more frustrated with it, so I kind of just stepped away from that scene because I wasn't having as much fun. My day to day nowadays is more so Mythic Plus has always been a big thing for me ever since that came out. And when did that come out? Legion, I believe, was when it came out. Mythic Plus has been something that I consistently do every day. Filling out my vault consistently every week. I've got a group that I consistently run with that I play with them all the time. It's a couple of guildies and then maybe one or two DPS or pugged whatnot. Yeah, Mythic Plus is generally the thing that fills up most of my time. My work schedule makes it a little difficult to consistently raid, unfortunately. And I do raid when I can. I consistently get ahead of the curve. I've gotten ahead of the curve for every tier except for one in Battle for Azeroth because I quit for a short period of time. But the PvE is generally what fills most of my time. And when I'm not doing that, maybe if like today, when I've been playing, it's been nuanced mount collecting. That's always been a big thing for me. I don't know why. I've always liked collecting mounts. I just think they're really, really cool. For the most part, Mythic Plus has always been the thing that's held my attention the most. Season 4 of Shadowlands is, as much as I hate to say the name of that expansion, was one of the seasons that I pushed a little higher than I normally do. And I want to say I was top 10, if not top 5 Demon Hunter on Thrall at one point. Got pretty good at eventually. It might have been season 3. It hasn't even been that long, but it's been long enough that I've chosen not to think about it too much because mainly Shadowlands. But for the most part, Mythic Plus is what interests me and holds my attention more than anything. I like the challenge of pushing higher and going for those keys as high as you can. I like getting to the those 25, that 26 range, that prestigious mark where I can say, yeah, I did this and I did it in time. Not necessarily an ego thing, but to be able to tell and show people I am one of the best players that are out there, and I like having that kind of prestigious aura to myself. So I chose Wormer's Temple as my favorite. There's a few reasons, and I thought quite a bit about it actually. Northrend is honestly a super super cool area in general. The entire continent is awesome, and I could have gone with a cliche answer that everybody says because when everybody thinks of their favorite zone, they always say Grizzly Hills. And Grizzly Hills is a fantastic zone, but I truly think that Wormer's Temple and Dragonblight as a whole is a little slept on. The snowy kind of terrain, I like it a lot. And then not only that, but the actual kind of lore behind Dragonblight and as a whole is really cool. I've always kind of liked the story between the 4 Dragonflights and the fall of Deathwing. Particularly the Red Dragonflight has some very interesting lore behind it. Alexstrasza being a particularly interesting character. And I've always kind of had a fascination with dragons. I always thought dragons were pretty cool. And so when I saw Wormer's Temple for the first time when I was probably like 10 years old or however old I was, I remember seeing it and thinking, man, this place is awesome. And I couldn't get enough of it. I thought the dragons were so cool. And I tried super hard to get a dragon mount for the longest time because I didn't have one. I think my dad ended up helping me get one for a long time. And I remember getting my red drake, specifically from the Wormer's Accord reputation, and just being so unbelievably happy. I thought I was the coolest person around. And 10 years old, I've got a dragon. Whatever. Tons of people had dragons. I remember being particularly fond of that one. And just I always loved the quests here. I love the music here. I love the scenery here. It's tranquil, but there's that feeling of like disaster because what happens here with the fall of Deathwing. It's always kind of held a special place in my heart for it. The main thing that keeps me playing, realistically, has to be the people that I play this game with. Had I nobody to play this game with, had all my friends decided, you know what, we don't want to play this game anymore. We're going to move on to Final Fantasy or, whatever game it is that they want to go play. I would say, okay, you guys go have fun. Probably just not going to play games anymore. Or I would follow them to whatever game they play. But thankfully, we've all decided that, this game is good enough for the most part at most given times to keep our attention and, keep us playing. And in most recently with the release of Dragonflight, I think Blizzard's doing a much better job. Constant updates. We just recently had the new patch come out, the 10.05, with the trading post. I think that's a really nice thing for them to add. I think that was extremely cool. Excuse me. Gives me something to do in my free time, maybe when I'm on an off day from work and none of my friends are on. Um, Realistically, I think the one thing that Blizzard really is struggling with at the moment and what they need to change is the constant and clear communication. They've said it before, and they've said before in the past, and they say it now, that be more concise and clear with the content that they plan to release, and they're doing a much better job now. Um, but it's far too soon to say that it's everything's fixed. Blizzard can say whatever they want. They can release the roadmap for the next year or so, which I think they already did. And I can say, that's awesome, keep doing that, but that's not going to fully convince me just yet that, they're, a changed person. They've turned over a new leaf. I think they're in the process of it, and they're working on it, and they're doing a good job. But there's a long way to go before I consider them doing the absolute very best that they can. And there's always small things like more content, and it's easy to ask for things like that without realizing the time and work that goes into creating things like that. People just always they want without realizing what it actually costs to get that kind of content. And and I'm a fairly realistic person. I understand that content takes time, but the content droughts that we get at the end of expansions, Shadowlands being a particularly large outlier, almost killed the game for a lot of me and my friends. There was, Shadowlands being a not so good expansion on its own, combined with a content drought with not really a whole lot to do. It ruined the game for a lot of people, and a lot of people stopped playing, and thankfully they came back for Dragonflight. And other people might ask for like, oh, they need more balancing changes, and people want everything to be viable at all times, and I always look at things like that and I say, well, you've got a large game here with a very complex class system. You can't expect everything to be good all at once. And so I think realistically, what we just need from Blizzard in the future is, more than anything, is concise, clear information and communication more than anything. And that will be good for the longevity of the game more than anything. As far as lore goes, and all, this is a very complex and large game that we have with, tons of novels, tons of graphic novels, everything. It was for sure hard to pick a favorite, when you actually sit down and think about it. But I think back about, some of the favorite characters that I have in this game, and some of the better experiences that I had. One of those times being in Mists of Pandaria, the Siege of Orgrimmar raid, really stuck with me. That was one of the best times I ever had in the game, actually raiding. It was actually the first time that I was ever a cutting edge raider, and the only time, because I never did it again because it was far too much work. And once I graduated high school, I didn't have the time for it anymore. But it also kind of made me realize that this is a really well written story, and Garrosh was a really, really cool character. I was like, this guy's, he's crazy. There's sense to him. A good villain makes sense, and everything Garrosh did, while terrible, made sense. Everything he was doing for for the Horde. What he thought was right, what he thought would ensure victory for the Horde. And you kind of to kind of see his character change. There's a quest chain, and I want to say something mountains over on Kalimdor. I forget the name of the area, but you essentially are a footman in Garrosh's army. And towards the end of the quest chain, one of the generals in there makes a rather questionable decision to kill civilians. Or I can't quite remember. It's been a very long time since I've done that quest chain or even leveled a character. Garrosh appears at the end of it and confronts this general for making this questionable and essentially unhonorable or dishonorable decision, and he kills him for it. And he talks about, Garrosh talks about how honor is everything, and you must never forsake it. And I was like, this is a cool character. This is a really cool, honorable orc who cares about people, not necessarily the lives of his enemies, but at least has regard for innocent lives. And see this development of Garrosh over the years, and then Mists of Pandaria comes out, and Blizzard just kind of outwardly says, yeah, Garrosh is going to be the villain. And I was really disappointed in that. Or he's going to be the end game boss, the final raid boss. And I was like, well, I wish you hadn't have told me that, but, nevertheless, let's see where they take this story. And we see this story of somebody who was forced to be war chief, essentially, when Thrall decided he wanted to leave, and he told Garrosh, "You're war chief now." And Garrosh, he wasn't ready. He didn't think he was ready, but Thrall assured him, "You're going to be okay. You're going to do great." And so the Mists of Pandaria campaign comes out, and there's a new continent that's been discovered, and Garrosh does what realistically I think any good war chief would have done, and they want to take this land in the name of the Horde. And that's fine. These are all great things, but we see this slow descent of madness, particularly because of the Shah, to Garrosh. And I think it was just one of the most well-written things that Blizzard has ever done. This slow descent into madness, because this man or this orc has been inflicted by the Shah since the moment he stepped foot on Pandaria. And I think Mists of Pandaria gave us one of the best trailers for a raid. I remember watching the Siege of Orgrimmar trailer and being so insanely impressed with it because of how well it was done. The yellowness of Garrosh's eyes just always stuck with me, and I was just always very impressed. But lore in general has always been a big thing about this. About this game. It's very interesting if you actually sit down and maybe read the novels. After Mists of Pandaria ended and we went into the expansion as Warlords of Draenor, I read War Crimes, and that actually ended up being my favorite book because Garrosh and seeing these things happen and seeing how we get plunged into this expansion is very interesting. And while unfortunate that you do have to buy these extra novels or things to get access to this information, it's well worth it in my opinion. And one of my favorite books and novels being Dawn of the Aspects. Always, like I said before, always loved dragons. The story of the four aspects, being gifted power by the Titans, and Galakrond's rest, and just the entire story, the entirety of itself is just so magnificently well written. And I could talk forever about all of the different World of Warcraft books. The book about Arthas being another good one that was very well written. Blizzard struggles in a lot of areas in this game. One thing they do not struggle with, and they actually exceed with and excel at, is creating stories and creating very good stories. Whether it be heroes like Varian and his noble sacrifice at the beginning of Legion, which did make us cry a little bit, let's be real, or if it's, Garrosh or any other number of villains, Arthas being one of the most prominent ones in World of Warcraft, and one of the, if not most popular. I think Blizzard has always done stories very well, and then while they have suffered at times, I think they've gotten back on track as of recently, and I'm hoping that in the future they continue to keep the stories a little more grounded. I think is one thing that they suffered from. I think Shadowlands got a little too cosmic for a lot of people, and it definitely did for me. And so I'm happy that Dragonflight is kind of bringing us this more grounded story with clear and concise, motivations for our villains. Razageth actually being a really good one, a very good example of what a villain should be, in comparison to what I think, a bad one is. I don't think the Jailer was written very well because I don't think his goal was clear enough. And even in the end, his cliche, uniting us against a greater evil cliche was horribly and terribly written. Whereas Razageth is, you in prison, me in a prison, I'm angry at you. Now I'm going to free my brothers and sisters, and we're going to take over the world. And very, very clear motivations between the villains is extremely, extremely important. And I think Blizzard's gotten back into that, and I'm very much enjoying it.
Yeah, I fully agree with the cosmic stuff. I don't think anyone does cosmic well. I don't even think Marvel does cosmic well.
No, they don't. As much as I love Marvel, dude, I can't get behind it. This whole cosmic threat, like we're the greatest champions ever. Like come on. We need grounded stories. Games change, a lot, and and obviously, game changes every expansion. But when you're comparatively speaking, say current Dragonflight versus Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King, I mean, hell, there was all kinds of situations. From the smallest ones being, you had your mount in your bag. It wasn't something that you learned. I think the complexity of this game has skyrocketed. in most recent years, I think Legion was when it really started to, or even probably Warlords of Draenor was when it really started to get more and more complex. You look at raid bosses now that have 20 different mechanics in them. You know, Razageth has 3 platform shifts and uh, all these, all these different mechanics and these as a spawn and these one-shot mechanics. And then you look at fights like, and obviously this isn't a very fair comparison, but you look at fights like Patchwork, which where the term Patchwork boss comes from. It was a tank and spank, and we don't really have those anymore. And that's fine. I think that's good for I think that's healthy for the game. I think keeping it complex and keeping it challenging is good for the game. I think there's a hard balance in there, though. I think there's a difference between challenging and dying to a one shot. I don't think those things are the same. But overall, the game is much harder to pick up now comparatively to 10 years ago and like Wrath of the Lich King, or Burning Crusade. Like I said, my dad randomly picked the game up at the store one day because he wanted to try it out, and he picked it up, and I think a month later or maybe 2 months later, he was raiding, and he was pretty good at the game. And you can obviously do that now. You buy the game, you get a level 60 boost, and you can jump right into the content. But the community has changed a lot too, and you don't. It's almost impossible to jump into the game like that, and I think that's not good for the game either. And obviously, there's nothing that I could do about that, or Blizzard could do about that. The community has changed a little bit for the worse sometimes in some aspects of this elitist attitude of only taking only the best, and people don't want new players in their groups, and and I'll be the first to admit that I've even thought the same thing before. I've gone into a raid before and was just looking to get in and get out, get my kills and get my loot and be done with it. I didn't want to teach somebody new how to play it, and obviously that wasn't the right thing to do at the time. And looking back on that, I should have been more. I should have been like, hey, like this is how you do this, rather than just being intolerant of it. And those are things you learn as you go. I have friends that just recently picked this game up, and I'm more than happy to teach them, and I'm more than happy to teach new players now as well. But I think the community is a big thing that's changed, and not necessarily for the better, unfortunately. As far as changing or adding anything into this game, there's not a whole lot that like that I could say that would be of value. I'm one particular player, but I look back at when I used to play the game, and when I used to play a lot more aspects of this game. I think Mythic Plus, where it is right now, is in a pretty good spot. I think other than the affixes kind of need a little bit of a rework sometimes. I think Tyrannical needs to be changed, things like that. Tyrannical and Fortified are just they're uninteresting, they're unfun. But if I were to add something big to the game, something that would really change the game for me, one of the reasons I stopped playing PvP, they got rid of PvP gear. I thought, well, like that's kind of lame. And then PvE gear became prominent in PvP, and people were using raid trinkets in arenas. And I remember one particular instance being in, what was it, Battle for Azeroth, the trinket off of Il'gynoth. It was like the Drestagath, or not Il'gynoth, sorry, it was like the Drestagath tentacle. Might have been Il'gynoth, I can't remember the name of it specifically, but it was the tentacle trinket. Anybody who PvP'd at the time knows exactly what I'm talking about. It would one-shot people. It would do an insane amount of damage in arenas, and for no reason. And I thought that was lame. And they kind of reeled it in Shadowlands, but they didn't do a good enough job, I feel like. And maybe this comes down to ignorance more than anything, but PvP hasn't quite felt the same since it was a crazy big deal to get your weapon back in Mists of Pandaria. And like I said, maybe that does come down to ignorance. Maybe I haven't tested it out recently enough, and maybe it is a lot better than it is, than it used to be. And perhaps that's, that'll be something that I will try out in the future. And if it's good, then, that's awesome. It's, there's not a whole lot to this game that, I'm not a game designer. This is all wishful thinking. I've always liked the idea of player housing. Player housing being super cool. I know they tried with the garrisons and Warlords of Draenor, and it didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. But I think there are ways to expand upon it that could be extremely extremely amazing for the WoW community. I think maybe guild housing would be an awesome start for it. Somewhere for you and your guild mates to hang out at. I think that would be a fantastic thing for them to do. But overall, I think more than anything, I think Mythic Plus does need another look. They do need to take another look at it, specifically the affixes. A lot of these affixes, people complain about every single one of them. People will complain about anything. And I don't have issues with a lot of them, but I do agree with the point that some of them are far more unfun to play against than others. And Mythic Plus hasn't really been looked at recently, really since Legion when it came out. They've removed affixes. They took out Inspiring and Necrotic, and Teaming isn't a thing anymore as well. I think that was only a thing in BFA, and then they took it out with Shadowlands. But a lot of these affixes that we still have were made for Legion, and I think they deserve a second look, and I think the community would benefit from that a lot. At the end of the day, as far as everything in this game is, good, bad, whatever it may be, we all still log in every day and play it, regardless of good, bad. Sometimes we quit for a little bit of time, but the lot of us come back every now and then, and sometimes we come back permanently. And I think no matter what Blizzard does, we might still all be here at the end of the day. At least a majority of us will be, and I think that's only because of friends that I've made in this game. Had it not been for them, I would have moved on a long time ago. But this is a nice community that we can all come to and play together and hang out in Discord and talk about our lives. These are people that are halfway across the country that I would have never met had it not been for this game. And if the game isn't that good, it's maybe looking back in Legion where I wasn't maybe having the most fun, but I still had my friends to play with me. That's good enough for me.